All right. Last time we talked, we were discussing encomienda, Spanish feudalism as it was introduced into the United States. If you don't remember, we discussed the invasion of the conquistadors. What was really interesting in 1513 in St. Augustine, Florida, Ponce de Leon was looking for the Fountain of Youth. Just kind of a little sidebar. In 1520, the Jesuits attempted to establish a mission among the tribes in what's now South Carolina. Now it's called Parris Island, and the Marine Corps is located there. Roanoke was attempted to be established at this time as a buffer in 1587 between the English and the Spanish. In 1605, the English in the northern colonies in Massachusetts Bay, under English Captain Weymouth, began capturing natives as slaves. An interesting story about it is that there's a Pawtuxet tribal member who was sold into slavery. This is accounted in Indian slavery in colonial America. His name was Misquantum. He will escape later, and he will become Squanto, who will help the new colonies learn how to grow corn. Interesting side fact. Powhatan and Jamestown start their conflict in 1607 with the founding of Jamestown. This is important because what's not mentioned much, especially in the movies, is that in March 1613, Pocahontas was staying with one of the tribes, the Confederation tribes, in the Powhatan Confederacy when it was attacked, and she was taken and kidnapped. They on purposely attacked it so that way they could kidnap her, because they were trying to basically hold her for ransom. So she too was technically a hostage or a slave. In 1636, the Pequot War breaks out. What's really fascinating is that in the first 6 months, the Pequots had defeated the English at nearly every engagement. However, the Massachusetts will recover in Connecticut, and they eventually will execute many of the leaders and the fighting men, and they will enslave the women and children. So what I'm trying to get at is that Native Americans were taken as slaves by the English here in the United States, and that's a lot of times not covered inside the textbooks. Harvard, in this same year as the Pequot War, was established in 1636, and part of its goal was the education of English and Indian youth. You'll see a picture of Caleb. I can't say his name. He's the first graduate in 1665. William and Mary is founded in 1693, also for education of like tribal leadership's children. In 1693, that same year, Spain declares that all slaves are free if they escape to Florida. As a result of this, the very first free African-American town called Fort Mose is established near St. Augustine, which is an interesting fact. By 1700, Native American servitude was the dominant form of non-white labor in the northern colonies. The English armies had enslaved more than 1,300 Indian men and women and children. As a matter of fact, in 1711, it was posted by the city of New York that all Negro and Indian slaves that are left out to be hired would be hired at the market house at the Wall Street slip. The connection between slavery and Wall Street is an ancient one. If you watch Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio, you start exploring what's known as the English deer fur trade. In 1707, 121,355 pelts were sold out of Charleston, South Carolina. 1713, it had diminished to 60,000. 1714 to 50,000. 1715, it rebounded to 55,000. But by 1716, it declined to 4,702. There's a reason why there was a decline in the pelts, and it has to deal with slavery. By the way, by 1748, it rebounded to 160,000 deer pelts. When we start talking about Nairn, who was the first Indian agent out of South Carolina, he starts developing a plan, and that is how to use just war to benefit the English colonies, specifically this idea of attacking Spanish holdings as well as French. Just war is anything that to where the prisoners of war can become your captive, and i.e. a slave. So as long as you are in disagreement with the specific European power, then you have the right to attack its proxies, which were the tribes. So in May 1692, the Savannah attacked the Cherokee under the banner of South Carolina. And they took, at this one village, they took all the women and children in the village as slaves and sold them at Charleston. The Savannah are a band of the Shawnee. This is very interesting because what you're going to start seeing is South Carolina's effort to escalate war between the very large tribes, specifically the Shawnee, the Cherokee, the Choctaws, and the Creeks, or the Muskogee. At the same time, the Yamasee become the extensive trading partner with South Carolina. By 1699, to create an incentive of this, South Carolina said that one Native American slave would equal 200 deer pelts or deer skins. So what they were in effect doing was incentivizing the just war of tribes that were allied with them attacking other tribes that were allied with other European nations. So by 1694, the Muskogee began attacking the Appalachia. If you remember last time we talked, the Appalachia were initially the tribe that stood up to DeSoto, and DeSoto's invasion of their one village allowed him to care for himself over the winter before he invaded the Muskogee. As it turns out, the Appalachia were under the protection of the Spanish, flag, the Empire of Spain. By May 1698, the South Carolinians make inroads. A man named Thomas Welch begins recruiting the Chickasaws. If you think of tribes like, if you think of these tribes, these mound cultures, you could call the Cherokees the Athenians, perhaps even call the Creeks Macedonians, call the Choctaws Dorians. But the Chickasaws, who were highly militaristic, were the Spartans of the Southeast. That's just the easiest example to give you. They were very militaristic, very warlike. So though the Choctaws had 110 villages, and as we talked last time, the Creeks had 79 tribal towns plus the 37 Confederated Seminole related sister towns, and the Cherokee had about 120 towns. As you can see, this 20-town system of the Chickasaws it's interesting that South Carolina would choose them, but they chose them because they were the Spartans of the Southeast. In January 1700, South Carolina had its first problem. Indentured servants that were from Ireland, Scotland, won their freedom. They had come, they had established, helped build the colony, and so as a result, they won their freedom. This is going to mean that South Carolina, so that we can maintain its agricultural presence, is going to have to import more slaves, and that's exactly what they do. And so they ramp up taking Native Americans as slaves. In February 1702, it gets so serious that Iberville, who is the governor of France, sets up a peace meeting between the Choctaws and Chickasaws. He warns the leaders of the Choctaws that South Carolina is not going to stop until all Choctaws are slaves. As a result, he tells the Chickasaws that for the 600 Choctaws you've captured as slaves, you've killed 1,200 Choctaws. And as a result, you've also lost 800 of your Chickasaw warriors in death. This is just showing the scale of intertribal warfare that was being encouraged by South Carolina. In August 1702, the Chickasaws become the primary slave catchers. As a matter of fact, one of the things that Otis mentions in the colonial complex is that the most skillful Chickasaw warriors at this time begin to challenge and override the prestige of the village Mikos, or the headmen. If you remember our last map, we talk about there was a war chief and a peace chief, a white town and a red town. The red towns are beginning to dominate the white towns in the Chickasaw Nation.